What's good, everybody? In this video, I'm going to break down a beat that's similar to the harder beats on his recent project, Almost Healed, kind of similar to the beats that Southside did. Per usual, I made this beat from scratch, so I'm going to show you my whole process of making the beat. And with all that being said, let's just jump right into the beat. Alright, so the first thing I want to talk about with the sample is the tempo. I chose a tempo of 160 beats per minute. Typically, these faster beats range between about 155 and 170. So going into the first sound, I actually have two different sounds that are layered together. The first being this full choir preset from Omnisphere, and then the second one being this choir preset from Purity. With these, I put down the same exact MIDI, and it's pretty much just a chordal choir pattern. So this whole pattern is pretty much just the first two measures repeated, and then I just threw in a couple higher notes over here. So the sample is in the key of D sharp minor, so pretty much the entire choir pattern here revolves around the D sharp minor chord. So starting off with this lower interval here, it's D sharp and A sharp, or the first and the fifth note in the D sharp minor scale. Then I copied that A over and increased it in velocity, and then I put on the rest of the D sharp minor chord on top of it. So if I put this up an octave, it looks like an actual D sharp minor chord, except the top note is down one octave. So once I had that, I just copied it over using Control B. The D sharp note down here went to F and F sharp, and I moved this top F sharp note down 1/2 step, so it's creating a little bit of tension. Then once I had that, I highlighted these two and I copied it over for the full 8-bar pattern. And then all I did on the second half of each 4-bar was I went up here and I just added this top note of the A sharp just to add a little bit more depth to these chords. Then I routed both of those to one mixer track and I put a few effects on it. The first being these reverb settings in RC20. Then I put on an EQ to cut out some of the lows and then just boost some of the highs so it makes the vocal sound a little more airy. Then I went into Portal and I got this anxiety preset from the Experiment Club 1 bank. And then I opened up another instance of Portal and put on this partial divide preset from the default library. And then lastly, I opened up Shaper Box and I just put on this sidechain type of volume gate. So the layered choirs together now sound like this. So after the first couple choir sounds, I went back into Omnisphere and got the whistling choir preset, and I went in and just laid down a basic pattern where it's just the D sharp minor chord, and I'm just switching it from D sharp minor down to the sustained chord. And kind of similar to the first pattern, I just took that top A sharp note and dropped it 1 octave, and I pretty much just have this repeating for the full 8-bar loop. For effects, I went into Portal and put on the grain swells preset from the factory library. Then I put on a bandpass EQ and cut out some of the harsh highs and a bunch of those lows. Then I put on another EQ to cut out some of the harsh nits in the mids. And then lastly, I just put on a little bit of a high shelf on it. So for my next sound, I went to Analog Lab and I got this key preset from my boy Marco Lenz's Riot Kit. And with this sound, I just put in a simple and repetitive piano pattern. It's just using the 3rd, 2nd, 1st, and 5th notes in the scale. And as you can tell, it's pretty much just the same 3 notes being repeated. And then I just throw in the A sharp at the end of each measure. So what I ended up doing is I exported all those as audio clips to save a little bit of CPU. The way I did that is I went to the mixer track and I armed all of these by making these dots red. And I had the pattern clip dropped into the playlist here and I selected about 10 measures. Then I went back to the mixer track and then hit Alt-R, selected song selection, and then hit start to render it out. Then I took all those audio clips and I dropped them back into the playlist here and I added my last couple layers. So after those 3 sounds, I then got this synth one shot. Then I put in this pattern that's pretty similar to the second choir pattern, except the A sharp is up 1 octave. And then I just layered on some top notes with that too. This is pretty quiet in the final mix, but this is just to give it a little bit of an extra texture, and it just fits really well with the drums later on. And then for my last sound of the sample, I got this synth bass. I added a little bit of reverb to it, and then I just put down a basic pattern where I just have the root note hitting on the 1st and the 5th measure. Now that I had all of the stems done, I arranged the loop and I rendered it out as an audio clip where I opened it into a new project file where I added the drums.
Roll up, Tez.
I just took the stems from the rendered out loop and just rearranged them to my liking. So I took the original choir sound and I threw in a little bit of a switch up where I just make this kind of stuttering type of choir. And so how I did that is I just went and took the original stem here, clicked on the top left corner and then hit make unique. And then I routed that to a separate mixer track where I put on some gross beat. So along with the gross beat, I also opened up this plugin called D-Blue Tape Stop. I set the trigger here to 0, the slowdown, and D-click to these settings. And then on the trigger, I right clicked and hit create automation clip. And I just put in these 2 automation clips here. So I originally just made this one and then I duplicated this one over, clicked on the top left, hit make unique, and then lowered both of those down so that the tape stop happens, but then it comes back in afterwards. So now finally going into the drums, the first drum sound I got was the snare. So I just put in a pretty common trap pattern where the snare's hitting on every 3rd beat. Then I got this hit 1 hi-hat sound, and I put in this hi-hat that has a 2-step type of bass to it. I went in and changed some of the velocities of these 2-step notes and then deleted a couple of them to add some extra bounce to it. Then I went to the magnet setting and got the 1/3 step snap to grid, and then took the paintbrush and just drew in a bunch of these rolls. And also quick tip, if you want to make these descending type of rolls, all you have to do is draw the roll, then you can hold shift and left click and then click and drag and it'll follow your cursor. After the hi-hats, I went and got this Southside sounding snare. And with this snare pattern, I put notes on the typical off beats here. And then similar to the hi-hats, I went and got that 1/3 step snap to grid and took the paintbrush and just put these rolls in using the 1/3 step snapping. And whatever gaps that I left with the hi-hats are filled in with these snare rolls. That way the 2 patterns don't end up clashing too much. Then I went and got this open out sound, and I turned up the out knob to shorten the sound a little bit. And overall, I tried to keep this pattern relatively simple just because I already did a bunch with the hi-hats and the snares. After the open hats, I went and grabbed my kick sound. And this kick pretty much just layers wherever I wanted the 808 to hit harder. So it's on the 1st, 5th, and 7th measures. And then there's just these other smaller ones here that are lower in velocity. So now moving on to the final sound, which is the 808. So the first thing I did is I went to this tab and I tuned it to C, and I put an envelope on it so everything's down except for the hold. So the original 808 sound looks something like this, but then I put some boost on it and then also turned up the out to make it hit harder and also make it a little shorter. So for this first pattern, I tried to keep it a little bit simpler because I just wanted this to be present during the verses. And this pattern primarily revolves around the E note, and also threw in a few of the 5th note in the scale. So in this case it's B, just to switch it up a little bit. So now going into the second 808 pattern, this is pretty similar to the first one where the E note is primarily being played throughout the pattern. The only thing here that's kind of different is I just have a couple of these octave rolls that stick out a little bit. And then at the end here, I have this descend of some really high notes.
Roll up, Tez.